Hello, everyone, and welcome to my thoughts on The Last of Us Episode 6, entitled Kin. As always, the first few minutes of this review will be spoiler free, just in case you haven't seen the show yet or played the game and don't want to be spoiled, but still want to know if it was good or not. And then later on, I will dive deeper into the nitty gritty details of the episode. But I will, of course, give you a fair warning before I do. Alright, let's get into this. My thoughts without spoilers. This episode was very different from episode 5, where episode 5 centers more on action. Episode 6 centers entirely on Joel and Ellie's relationship, and especially on how Joel is dealing with his growing feelings for Ellie. I can't say a lot without giving too much away, but if you've played the game, this is the part of the story that takes place in and around Jackson. And that's all I'll say about that. I can say that I really liked this episode. There are a few issues with it that I wasn't in love with, but nothing I hated. The ending left a little to be desired, in my opinion, but it doesn't ruin the whole thing. Overall, it was a great episode and definitely worth a rewatch. I always like to watch these episodes twice before making these reviews because I catch so many more details the second time around, and this episode was no different. This was an emotionally charged episode, both sad and hopeful. Joel goes through a lot in this one, and Pedro Pascal's acting is top notch. I think it's his best performance so far, and really it rivals anything he's done before and anything else. I've seen almost everything he's been in, and I think that Oberyn Martell is the only performance that comes close to the quality that we get to see here. He's able to convey so much through just a look or a micro expression. He shines in a leading role, and I'm thoroughly impressed. There were a lot of great moments in this episode, almost all of which are different from their game counterparts, although there are a few that are nearly cut and paste straight from the game, but yeah, the majority of what happens is new for the show. There are some iconic moments from the game that didn't make it into the show that I definitely missed, but I also understand why they weren't included, probably mostly for logistical reasons. And some of the moments that were from the game were changed quite a bit, so much so that I was left constantly guessing what was going to happen next because nothing was going the same way it goes in the game, which is good and bad at the same time. Good because I don't feel like I'm just watching a cutscene compilation from the game, because that would definitely be boring, but bad because the changes are a little bit distracting on the first viewing, at least for me. Which is why I need to watch the episodes more than once before making these reviews, because I spend the first viewing just feeling a little bit confused and wondering where they're going with the changes to the story. And then after seeing how it all plays out and seeing that it worked, even though it was different from the game, I can then go back and watch it a second time with a much greater appreciation. And that was definitely true for this episode more than others, I think. Anyway, even with all the changes, I think this was a great episode, and I think it did a great job capturing the feelings of the situation, maybe even a bit better than the game did sometimes. I will go into more detail about that in the spoiler section, though, since I can't talk about it without giving stuff away. And I definitely want to talk about the differences between game Joel and TV Joel, because they are more obvious here than we've ever seen so far. And I know that some people probably won't like those changes, but I do, and I want to tell you why. But it will require spoilers, so I think we should move on into the spoiler review and discussion section now. So if you don't want to be spoiled for this episode or the game, then stop watching now. But don't forget to come back after you've seen the episode and let me know what you thought in the comments below, because I'd love to hear from you. Okay, let's get into my thoughts with spoilers. The episode starts 3 months after the events of the previous episode. Yeah, we skipped 3 whole months of Joel and Ellie traveling on foot through very dangerous territory. They mention seeing towns swarming with infected, but of course we don't get to see that. Kind of wish we could have, though, but yeah, it's not a big deal. The game also skips this time, so it is what it is. Nothing significant happens in those 3 months, I guess. Although something does change for them. Joel and Ellie are closer than they've ever been before. However, both of them are still not willing or able to admit how much they care about the other. But it's obvious that they do. Anyway, they've been to several towns in Wyoming looking for Tommy, but with no luck. And they find a log cabin out in the middle of nowhere, owned by an older couple who are just hilarious. Joel holds them at gunpoint to get information out of them. He wants to know exactly where on the map they are, and he uses the tactic that he uses in the game where he has one of them point to the map and then the other, and if they match, then he knows he can trust them. And once he's convinced that they both are telling him the truth, he relaxes a bit and puts his gun away. Now, I never felt any danger in this scene from anyone. It's pretty obvious that this old couple isn't going to do them any harm, but it's also pretty clear that Joel has no intentions of doing them harm either. But once upon a time, he might have. He's killed innocent people in the past. I think he's trying to put that life behind him, for Ellie's sake, if nothing else. He doesn't want her to see that version of him, and he doesn't want her to live that way either. But this is a foreshadowing of something similar that happens later on in the game, where Joel uses this tactic in desperation in order to save Ellie's life. And I believe that with Ellie's life at risk, even TV Joel will do anything necessary to save her, including hurting and killing people. I mean, we've already seen it once before, and that was before he loved her. I'm actually looking forward to seeing an unhinged Joel. Anyway, Joel asks them about Tommy, but they've never heard of him. He asks them what's the best way west, but they advise him to go east because only death awaits them on the west side of the river. They say there's something over there that leaves dead bodies around, but they don't know who or what it is. And Joel looks very nervous about that. And after they leave the cabin to continue on their way, he has an anxiety attack. He can't breathe. He feels like his heart is seizing up. And it freaks Ellie out because she thinks he's having a heart attack or something. But he's fine, and he gets over it pretty quickly. And this is just the first of several panic attacks that Joel has in this episode. The fear of possibly losing Ellie to violence is really starting to get to him, and I'm sure that's mixed up with his PTSD as well. He's been bottling up all these feelings for so long, refusing to deal with them, and now they're all coming out in the open again, and he's not handling it very well. They spend the night in a cave, and Ellie tells Joel about trying to cure Sam with her blood. She's been keeping that secret for 3 months. And it seems like she might be having doubts that they can actually make a cure, but Joel tries to encourage her about it. And then Ellie wants to go to sleep, and Joel says that he'll take both watch shifts. But then we cut to the morning, and Joel is sound asleep. He wakes up with a start, terrified that he'd let his guard down, only to find Ellie standing guard with the rifle. It's made clear that over the last 3 months that he trained her a lot in how to keep watch and stay safe and mindful, and he seems to be proud of her, but he insists that she should wake him up next time. And then we get so many beautiful panoramic shots as they travel across the country. They're in Wyoming now, and the mountains and the snow and the trees are just gorgeous. But then they are suddenly surrounded by several people on horseback with guns. And these people have a dog that has been trained to sniff out the cordyceps infection, which is a really good idea, by the way. And they bring this dog out, and it first sniffs Joel, but of course they don't, it doesn't find anything. But both Joel and Ellie are terrified of what the dog will do when it sniffs Ellie, since she had been bitten twice, and she does test positive for the fungus on those scanner things. And as the dog approaches Ellie, it growls and looks threatening. And the camera focuses on Joel, and you can tell he's starting to have another PTSD episode. He's in another position where a child he cares a great deal about is put in a life-threatening position, and he is powerless to stop it. But just before he's about to do something that would probably get them killed, the dog accepts Ellie, and the danger is past. They want to know Joel's name, and he tells them, and that's when a woman comes forward because she recognizes the name Joel, and she is, of course, Maria, Tommy's wife. So Joel and Ellie are given horses to ride and are taken to the town of Jackson, which is walled in and looks pretty much like it does in the game. Now, this is where in-game events start to really diverge in the show. In the game, Ellie and Joel never actually go into Jackson, so pretty much everything that happens in Jackson doesn't happen in the game. They see the town from a distance once, but all the events actually play out at the hydroelectric power plant outside of Jackson and in the surrounding countryside. In the show, Joel and Ellie pass by this power plant, but they don't stop there. And of course, in the game, the power plant is where they finally find Tommy, and Tommy is the one who hugs Joel and is happy to see him. Joel isn't very emotional about the reunion at all, but in the show, Tommy is in Jackson, and Joel sees him from a distance and runs to Tommy, giving him a huge bear hug and nearly crying with relief, and then grinning and laughing because Tommy is okay, and he feels silly for coming out to rescue him when Tommy obviously didn't need rescuing. And TV Joel is so much more emotional than game Joel, which I will talk about in a minute. Anyway, Ellie watches the reunion and she doesn't seem very sure about it. It almost looks like she might be a bit jealous seeing Joel express so much feeling for someone else when he refuses to do so with her. So that's interesting, because I don't think that's in the game either. Or if it is, it's not very obvious. So then Tommy and Maria take them to the town cafeteria so they can have a decent meal. And Ellie's rather rude during this scene because she doesn't trust the situation. She's getting a weird vibe here, mainly from Maria, who makes it perfectly clear that she doesn't trust Joel at all. Since Tommy told her all the horror stories of the things they used to do, she thinks Joel is a bad person. And Ellie's not dense. She can pick up on that. And Joel is her family, and she feels protective of him and thus defensive toward anyone who might threaten that family. Joel has to correct Ellie's manners a couple times because of how rude she is, which is kind of funny. Joel's Texas manners come out in the presence of Tommy's wife, so he still does have some social skills. I guess he saves them only for special occasions. After this, they give Joel and Ellie a tour of the town, and it's really cool to see it all in live action because they did a fabulous job of making it look just like Jackson in the game. They show them the stables, and Ellie meets a young colt named Shimmer, which is the name of her horse in The Last of Us Part 2. So, a little foreshadowing there. At this point, Joel goes off to have some one-on-one time with Tommy, just like in a game, and Maria takes Ellie with her to get her cleaned up and whatnot. And Ellie is not comfortable with Joel leaving her, but she really doesn't have a choice, and that is straight from the game. But the conversation between Joel and Tommy is very different from the one they have in the game. So they go to a bar to share a few drinks, and Joel lies a lot in this scene. Still keeping his guard up. In the game, he doesn't lie nearly as much. Tommy asks him how Tess is doing. He says she's fine. He asks him who Ellie is, and he says that she's just some big shot Firefly's daughter and he's being paid to deliver her somewhere. But he doesn't mention Ellie's immunity, and he doesn't let on how he feels about any of it. He acts completely detached from the conversation emotionally, and you can tell that Tommy doesn't buy it. Joel wants Tommy to go with them the rest of the way to the Fireflies, since it's only a week's ride south from there. But Tommy doesn't want to. He tells Joel that Maria is pregnant and he can't take the risk. And this is quite a departure from the game. In the game, Maria isn't pregnant and she and Tommy never have children. I wonder what ripple effect this will have in season 2, because I can see that changing things, at least in regards to Tommy's motivations and willingness to take risks. And also a change from the game is Joel's desire for Tommy to come with them to the Fireflies rather than just pawning Ellie off on Tommy straight away. In the game, it's Joel's intention from the very beginning to leave Ellie with Tommy, and that's what their first conversation is about. But in this scene in the show, he doesn't even mention it. He just wants Tommy to go with them. Anyway, Joel doesn't take the news very well that Tommy is going to be a father. Tommy is about to live the life that Joel lost. And Joel can't feel happiness for his brother. He can only be reminded of his own loss. And, he's probably jealous too. And of course, Tommy doesn't take Joel's reaction well, and they argue, and Joel storms out, saying that they'll be leaving in the morning. And once outside, he starts having another anxiety attack. Again, he's being forced to face all kinds of emotions that he's kept shoved down deep for the last 20 years. And now they're all coming to the surface at once, and he just can't handle it. And then he sees a woman who from behind looks like his daughter Sarah. And a little girl runs over and hugs the woman. And you can tell that Joel is thinking that the little girl could be his granddaughter. But then the woman turns around and he's brought back to reality when she's obviously not Sarah. And he looks shaken. I think he's finally starting to see that he really does have a problem, that his tight-fisted grip on the past isn't healthy. But, he still doesn't know what to do about it. Meanwhile, Ellie's taken a shower and Maria gives her some new clothes, the same pink and white hoodie that she wears during this part of the game. In Maria's house, Ellie notices a chalkboard on the mantle that is a memorial to two children, Kevin and Sarah. Maria insists on trimming Ellie's hair, and that gives them some time to talk. Ellie finds out that Kevin was Maria's son, who died just a few days after the outbreak at age 3, and that Sarah was Joel's daughter. And up until now, Ellie doesn't know that Joel even had a daughter. But she says it explains a lot about Joel, knowing that he lost a child. And I think that Ellie can finally empathize with Joel because now she knows why he is the way he is, and she knows why he treats her the way he does. Maria tries to convince Ellie that Joel is a bad man that can't be trusted. But Ellie defends him because she's spent the last several months with him and feels like she knows him pretty well and that she can trust him more than anyone else in the world. This scene isn't in the game, of course, because the game is only from Joel's point of view, but in the game we do know that Maria told Ellie about Sarah and even gives Ellie a picture of Joel and Sarah together. I wonder if she gave Ellie that picture in the TV show too. I hope so. It brings about a nice scene later on in the game. Next, Maria takes Ellie to go see a movie, since it's movie night in Jackson, something that's also mentioned in the game. But Ellie can't relax and enjoy it because Joel isn't there. She hasn't seen him in hours and she's worried about him and looks for him in the crowd. She's really feeling like something's going on with Joel, like he's pulling away, and that scares her. Eventually, she just leaves the movie and goes out onto the street to look for Joel. But Joel is holed up in a cobbler's shop trying to fix his worn out boot. But really he's there because he just doesn't want to be around anyone else, because he's struggling with an inner crisis that's coming to a head. And this scene isn't in the game, but it was wonderfully acted, and I really enjoyed watching it. Tommy comes in with a new pair of boots for Joel, and they talk. Joel opens up to Tommy in a way we've never seen him do with anyone else because he trusts Tommy. And if there's anyone he can be vulnerable with, it's his brother. And he finally tells the truth to Tommy and to himself. He tells Tommy that Tess was killed and that Ellie is immune, and the only reason he's taken Ellie so far is because Tess made him promise he would do it. But he admits that he can't do it anymore. He's not as young as he used to be. He's slower and can't hear well, and he wants to keep Ellie safe, but time and time again he fails her. She had to save his life in Kansas City, and Henry had to save her life from Sam, and Joel froze up when he thought that dog was going to tear her to pieces because the fear grips him so hard he can't even think or move. And he has dreams every single night. He can't remember what they are, but when he wakes up he feels like he lost something. And by this time, Joel is crying with tears and everything, and he begs Tommy to take Ellie the rest of the way to the Fireflies, because he knows that if he does it himself, he'll just get her killed. And he can't face the possibility of Ellie dying. He can't face the possibility that he's going to fail her the same way he failed Sarah. So Tommy finally agrees that he'll take Ellie at dawn. And then Joel goes to the house that he and Ellie were given to stay in, and he finds Ellie in her room, and we get the scene from the game that takes place in the ranch house, and it's pretty much word for word from the game, minus a few lines. Ellie is sitting and reading through an old diary of the girl who lived there long ago, and she guesses that Joel came there to tell her that he's leaving. Well, she actually overheard part of Joel and Tommy's conversation. Joel tries to reason with her, and Ellie brings up Sarah, telling Joel that she's not her. And of course, Joel puts a stop to that topic immediately, but not in an angry way like he does in the game. It's more of a pleading. Please don't bring that up, I beg you. And Ellie tells him that she's lost people too. Everyone she's ever cared about has either died or left her, everyone except for him. And she very emotionally admits that she would be more scared with anyone else but him. And Joel puts up his walls again because he can't let her get to him. If he does, then he won't be able to let her go. And so he tells her that she isn't his daughter and he is not her dad. And in the morning, they're going their separate ways. And this scene, even though it was one of those that was copied from the game, which usually annoy me a little bit, like I mentioned in my review of episode 4, for some reason this one didn't. I think the actors pulled it off really well. It's very close to the game, and the scene is very emotional, and it just works. So I was happy about that. And so then Joel leaves, and he goes into his own room and sits on his bed, and he starts having memories of Sarah. He remembers decorating the Christmas tree with her, and he remembers her face, and he has another cry. All these feelings he's having for Ellie are bringing up his memories of Sarah, memories that he's probably kept repressed for a long time just so that he wouldn't have to deal with the pain. But I think he's finally allowing himself to come to terms with Sarah's death, and he's realizing that Ellie has become just as much a daughter to him. He's really spent this entire episode realizing it, which is why he's having the anxiety attacks and why he's so afraid, because he can't lose another daughter. He can't go through that pain again. Anyway, the next day, Tommy comes to get Ellie, and they go to the stables to get a horse for the trip. But they find Joel there, saddling up a horse, which he admits his plan was to steal it and ride away. But he's been there for 30 minutes and still hasn't managed to leave. Then he tells Ellie that she deserves a choice, but still thinks that Tommy is her best bet. And Ellie immediately shoves her bag at Joel and says, "Let's go." And he says, "Okay." And they say goodbye to Tommy, and then they ride off together on the same horse. Now, I want to pause this review for a moment to talk about everything that happened with Joel up to this point, because we just saw a very different side of Joel that isn't in the game. And some people may not like it because it is a rather large departure from Game Joel. We never see Game Joel cry, for instance. We never see Game Joel afraid or really very emotional at all. And I've heard some people say that TV Joel is weak because of the emotions that he has. And for some reason, they think that that's a negative thing. But you know what? I disagree. And not only am I okay with this change, I actually love it. I think that the show gives the writers more freedom with what they can do compared with the game. And one of those things is freedom to portray a character with more human feelings. I love Game Joel. He is my all-time favorite video game character after all, but he does have a problem, and I recognized it even years ago, and that is, as a video game character, he's not very human and tends to be a bit one-dimensional in his personality. You know, we know that he's tough, gruff, unfriendly, hard, distrusting, slow to smile, and quick to anger. He's an expert at bottling up any and all emotions but anger, and nothing and no one can get through that shell of his. Barely even Ellie can. Of course, we understand why he's like this, and we don't hate him for it. And Joel in the show is very much like this too. However, Game Joel isn't completely realistic because no matter how hard and tough and strong a person is, there are always going to be moments of weakness and vulnerability. We all have them because we're not robots, we're human. There are always moments where we experience grief and fear, loneliness, worry, and joy. Emotions so strong that we can't hide them, no matter how hard we try. But this is something that Game Joel doesn't really ever do. We don't really know what he's feeling most of the time. We know that he has scars from his past, from losing Sarah, and we know that he doesn't want to let anyone else get that close to him out of fear of losing them as well. But that's about the gist of it. We don't know how that affects him on a day to day basis, or if it does at all. Does Game Joel suffer from PTSD? We don't know. Does he have nightmares? Does he feel inadequate or lonely? Does he think about Sarah still? If yes, then how often does he think about her? Is Game Joel ever afraid? We don't really get to know these things about him. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the limitations of the video game itself. We only know Joel through gameplay and a few cutscenes. And since Joel isn't very forthcoming with his thoughts and feelings during gameplay, that leaves only cutscenes really. But they don't want to just have 10 minutes of cutscenes to show us exactly what Joel is thinking and feeling in any given moment. It's a game, not a movie. So we don't get any scenes where Joel lets his guard down when he's by himself. He's always with other people. And also, I think the facial animations that were cutting edge back then were still limiting in how they portrayed character emotions, and it makes their expressions feel a little stiff sometimes, at least in the first version of the first game. So all of that combined to make the game Joel a little bit one-dimensional. But for a game character, we don't expect more than that. For a game character, he feels complex and nuanced because we understand and accept the limitations of the game. And compared with other games, he's the most complex and nuanced character ever made, at least in my opinion. But if they had made TV Joel that way, I don't think he would have been a very believable character, or at least not a relatable one, or an interesting one to watch. And that's not the only thing they changed about Joel. Game Joel, even though he's in his mid 50s, is as spry and in shape as he was when he was 30, and he can battle his way through hordes of infected and raiders with barely a scratch. Game Joel is basically Jason Bourne meets Wolverine. And that works in a video game where the main point is fun and exciting gameplay. And it wouldn't be fun and exciting if Joel's knees kept going out every time he hiked up a few flights of stairs, or if he fractured his hand every time he punched a guy in the face too hard, right? But those are real weaknesses that a real human man his age would face. And in order for the TV show to be believable, they can't have Jason Bourne Wolverine Joel. And so they limited the number of dangerous encounters that Joel has in the show. They limited the amount of fights and the level of peril in order to keep it believable. They gave Joel physical weaknesses that he doesn't have in the game. He's hard of hearing in his right ear from shooting guns so much, a very real hazard of shooting guns without ear protection. TV Joel has back pain and gets winded after running. He gets tired from lack of sleep, and his age makes him not react as quickly as he might have 10 years earlier. And that goes for the emotions that a real human man would experience as well. TV Joel has internal scars the same as Game Joel, but they manifest in more ways than just grumpy unfriendliness. He suffers from PTSD, panic attacks, nightmares, fear of failure, fear of pain and loss, and terrible guilt over his failure to protect his daughter, and now fear of not being able to protect Ellie. These things don't make him weak. They make him human and imperfect and relatable. And I love that about TV Joel. Even years ago, I used to wish that Game Joel had shown more emotion and more varied evidence of his trauma because back then I felt like something was missing. But it wasn't until I got to know TV Joel that I really understood just how much was missing and how it filled a hole in his character that I'd always felt in the game. I absolutely love Pedro Pascal's Joel. I really think he couldn't have done a better job with him. And it makes me connect with Game Joel even better now. Because while playing the game, I can now imagine better what's going on inside Joel's head. And I think that Pedro's portrayal of Joel actually enhances Troy's version. They don't have to be Game Joel and TV Joel as if they're two separate characters. I choose to combine them in my head as two sides of the same coin. And that just makes the character so much better all around. And I'd love to know what you guys think of this. Let me know down in the comments because I know this is probably a somewhat controversial thing. Anyway, I know I've gone on for a minute about that, but I've been meaning to bring it up the last few episodes, but just kept forgetting. But this episode kind of threw it hard in our faces and didn't let me forget this time. But now back to the regular review. So after they leave Jackson, we get some really nice scenes with Joel and Ellie riding the horse through the countryside and just talking and enjoying a new aspect of their relationship, that of comfort and acceptance. There's no more pretense or false fronts between them now. They know how the other feels. Joel still isn't comfortable enough to admit that he loves Ellie or she him, but they both know that they care about each other. They've made a decision to stick together no matter what. For Joel, Ellie is his daughter, and he doesn't have to pretend she's not anymore. And Ellie no longer has to pretend that Joel isn't a father figure to her. Joel starts teaching Ellie to shoot the rifle. I think he knows that as much as he'd rather keep her at a distance from the violence of the world, that she'll be better off if she knows how to protect herself in every way possible. Because the world is violent, and trying to pretend that she can live apart from that will only get her killed. And I love the scene where he is teaching her to shoot. She keeps missing and she insists it's the rifle's fault. Its sights are off or something. So Joel takes a turn to show her how it's done, and he hits the bullseye on the first try. And he looks so smug about it too. I think it thrilled him that he looked so cool in that moment. Ellie was amazed at his skill, and that made him feel really great. This scene had me grinning the whole time. And then after 5 days of traveling, they finally make it to the University of Eastern Colorado where Tommy said the Fireflies would be. And oh man, it looks so much like in the game. They even have the monkeys that are loose on the campus. They see signs of the Fireflies, and so they know they're in the right place. But they don't encounter any clickers here like they do in the game. Anyway, they go inside the science building of the university, just like in the game, and find it empty. Although evidence of the Fireflies is everywhere, but they learn that the Fireflies must have moved on to a new location some time ago, and they see on a map that it's likely Salt Lake City. And that's when they hear voices outside, and they look out the window and see a group of guys armed with clubs. And they're obviously not Fireflies. So they sneak outside and try to ride off without the guys seeing them, but no such luck. One of the guys attacks Joel with his bat, and they fight, but Joel is able to get the guy in a chokehold and breaks his neck. Only afterward discovering that the broken handle of the guy's baseball bat had impaled Joel in the stomach. And Joel seems to forget that you shouldn't pull out the object that impales you because it will cause you to bleed out faster. He pulls it out and blood gushes. And then the other raider guys come running, and Ellie helps Joel onto the horse, and they hightail it out of there. Now, for those of you who have played the game, you know that this scene plays out a lot different than in the show. And actually, this is one of my favorite parts of the game, and was one of the few scenes I was actually worried that they would mess up in the show. And I feel like my worries were well founded, unfortunately. This scene disappointed me, because what we got in the game was so much better. In the game, Ellie and Joel aren't able to get out of the building before the raiders find them, and Joel ends up in a hand-to-hand fight with one of them while on a second-story balcony. The railing that they're fighting against breaks, and both of them fall. Joel has the misfortune to land on his back atop a piece of rebar that is sticking up, and it impales him through his back and out his abdomen. And in the game, it's such a shocking moment because no way that just happened to Joel, right? And of course they're not safe. Ellie has no time to help Joel at all because there are still raiders in the building. And so Joel can't just keep lying there, and Ellie has to pull him off that rebar. They don't really have a choice. And then she helps him stumble through the building, but Joel is fading fast, and he can't fight. He can't protect Ellie as the raiders come upon them, and she's forced to defend Joel all on her own for the very first time. And the more time passes, the more Joel fades, until by the time they get out of the building, he can't even stand up anymore. But Ellie manages to get Joel on the horse, and they ride to safety. This scenario in the game had so much more tension and peril than the show's version. It dragged out a long time after Joel got injured, showing his decline and the desperation of Ellie growing more and more as she has to defend them both. And she's so worried for Joel throughout the entire thing. And for a moment, it feels like there's no way they're making it out of that situation alive. But the show makes it happen so fast. The fight with the raider is quick, and you don't even see Joel get impaled. He just is after the fact. And then before you know it, they're riding away, and Ellie doesn't have to defend them at all. Sure, she shoots her gun as they ride away, but she really could have saved her bullets. The guys chasing them didn't have guns and couldn't have possibly caught up with a running horse. And once they were on that horse, the danger was basically past. It felt like the action had barely begun before it was over. There was no tension. Well, there was maybe a little bit, but barely any compared with what we got in the game. And there wasn't that prolonged fear and panic on Ellie's part. It was over so quickly. And I kind of get why they did it this way a little bit. Craig Mazin, the writer, even said that they did it this way because they wanted it to be a bit more grounded in reality. The injuries that Joel sustains in the game would be kind of impossible to survive without a hospital. And so they wanted to make his injury less severe so that there's a believable chance he survives it. And yeah, I get that. I get that. But I think that they still could have accomplished that with a better fight scene. Maybe more running and hiding from the bad guys, a longer fight, more tension and peril, you know? Having Ellie in danger and needing to protect Joel for a while, having it feel like their lives are really on the line here. What we got just felt so rushed. Seeing Joel actually get stabbed, I think, would have been more shocking than learning about it after the fact and being like, what in the world has happened? How did he get stabbed? Because we don't actually see it happen. If you watch it again, you can see when it happens, but you still don't actually see it happen. And I felt like it just took the impact and the shock out of it that, oh my gosh, Joel just got stabbed. Instead, it was like, oh, Joel got stabbed? What? When did that happen? So it just disappointed me after such a great episode. It felt like a letdown, especially after such a great action sequence in episode 5. That was a great action sequence where they actually improved upon the one that was in the game. And so I feel like with these really big action sequences, they do a really good job. But with the smaller ones, I don't know, I feel like they pull back even more. And it just, I don't know, it was just disappointing. But the episode ended the same way that that chapter of the game ended, with Joel finally succumbing to his blood loss and falling off the horse. Ellie can't wake him up, and she doesn't know what to do, and she begs Joel not to leave her because she can't do this without him. Her worst fears are coming true in that moment, her fear of ending up alone. And we're left on that cliffhanger. And Bella Ramsey did a really good job in this scene. I feel like it's even more emotional and desperate than the scene in the game. Just great acting all around. This was a great episode, with only that one disappointment for me with that fight scene at the end. But before I wrap up this review, I want to mention some of the little things that I noticed or liked about this episode. I loved the conversation between Joel and Ellie while they're camping for the night at the beginning of the episode. Ellie asks Joel if there's one thing he could do with his life, what would it be? And Joel says that he'd like to live in a ranch house and be a sheep farmer. And that's a bit of foreshadowing to the second game, which I won't spoil if you haven't played it, but if you have, then you know what I'm talking about. And then Ellie tells Joel about how much she loves space and astronauts, and she sort of rhetorically asks Joel if he knows which astronaut is her favorite, and he guesses Sally Ride. And he guessed right. He's come to know her well enough that he can guess her favorite astronaut. And Ellie isn't surprised that he guessed right. She only confirms his guess. The fact that Joel knows her that well is just a given at this point. And then near the end of the episode, as they're riding through the university campus, Joel brings up that conversation again. saying that he changed his mind about being a sheep farmer. He said when he was a kid, he wanted to be a singer. And Ellie tries to get him to sing a song, but he won't. But she gets him to agree to sing her one later. And this conversation is right out of the game, and so I loved that they put it in there. Another small thing I noticed was that when they're just entering Jackson, in the background you can see someone hanging sheets of paper on lines to dry. They're making paper, their own paper in Jackson. And this is further confirmed by the note that Maria leaves for Ellie, which was written on homemade paper. I thought that was just a nice touch. And also in Jackson, did anyone else see Dina watching Ellie from across the room? I mean, it might not have been Dina, but it totally could have been her. Also, another instance of this show's subtle storytelling through character expressions. When Joel and Ellie are having a meal with Tommy and Maria, Ellie swears and Joel chides her, reminding her to practice her manners, just the way any parent would. And Tommy notices and gives a little smile. He can see how Joel feels about Ellie with just that one little interaction. Joel is Ellie's parent, which is why he doesn't buy the lie that Joel tries to spin later on about Ellie just being a job. And I love the little moments while Joel and Ellie are riding on the horse and the conversations they have. Specifically, I love the one about contractors. Several times throughout the series so far, Joel answers Ellie's questions with the honest, matter-of-fact truth. And she always rolls her eyes when he does it and says that he should have made up a way cooler answer. She'd believe whatever he told her because she doesn't know any better. But time and again, Joel still just states the boring truth. Until that scene on the horse, when Ellie asks him what he used to do for a living, and he tells her that he was a contractor. And Ellie doesn't know what a contractor is, and so Joel decides to embellish it a bit, making it sound way cooler than it actually was, and that everyone loved contractors. And Ellie totally believes him and thinks it's really cool. And Joel just smiles. Again, I think he likes it when Ellie is impressed by him. And then Ellie leans her head against Joel's back, and Joel just keeps on grinning. I think that these moments are the best that the two of them ever have. This is when they are the happiest. Their feelings are out in the open. There are very few walls left between them. They have each other, and that's all they really need. And oh man, you guys, the score during these scenes, it's straight out of the game and it's so perfect. Like I've said before, I absolutely love the score of The Last of Us game, and I am so happy that they put the same score in the show. And in this moment, it's a lighter, more hopeful tune that just makes me smile as I watch them ride across the wilderness. I loved so many more moments in this episode, but to list them all would make this video over an hour long, so I think I will stop here. I'd love to know what you guys thought of this episode, and whether or not you agree with my take on it. Let me know your thoughts down below. I will see you guys next week in my review of episode 7, so I hope you tune in for that. Give this video a like if you liked it, and until then, you guys, I hope you play safe, play nice, and have fun. Bye, guys.